Hi, I'm Anna. Welcome back to Books on the Go. I hope you're doing well. We're still in lockdown here, and I thought it would be good to do my top 10 isolation reads for self isolation or shelf isolation. And these are, I've got 10, and I've been playing around with it actually for a while and just found it really hard to narrow it down. And I ended up doing 5 fiction and 5 non fiction. And so I actually only have 8 with me because for the non-fiction I borrowed a couple of Amanda and Annie's suggestions, but which I don't have them handy. So we'll just go with these 8 for now. And what I was looking for, I think it's a funny time because for some people, if you've lost your job or you can't pay the rent, which I know people in that situation, or you've had to fire people, and it's a very unsettling time for a lot of people, which means that even if you're at home a lot more, you're not necessarily able to concentrate on reading. So it is hard to concentrate, and I think if you are, picking up a book, it needs to be sort of either very gripping and page turnery or a really comforting read that gives you a bit of an escape. And so I've chosen books that I think are just books that you really want to keep coming back to and that you look forward to, that give you a sense of comfort or quiet sort of meditation or escape from whatever's happening. So starting with the fiction, the first one is The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. This is her follow-up novel after her huge hit with Station 11. And I only read Station 11, I think a couple of years ago, and really loved it. And that, of course, is a very apt read at the moment because it's set in a world after there's been a pandemic, and which has wiped out most of the population. But it is despite that, it is actually a very hopeful and beautiful novel. So I would recommend that, of course, and I've read that and loved it, and been really excited about this one, and I haven't read it yet. I think it'll be my next read. I'm very much looking forward to getting to it, and I don't know much about it except that it's partly set in a 5-star hotel on Vancouver Island, which I just can't wait to be there. I've been to Vancouver. I didn't get to Vancouver Island because I was there for a competition, and we never really got out actually. But the whole setting around Vancouver is so beautiful. So I'm immediately hooked just by that setting. And then it's partly set in New York, where a Ponzi scheme has sort of imploded and left a lot of wealthy people out of pocket. And that's based on, well, it sounds a bit similar to Bernie Madoff and his schemes, which came unstuck a few years ago. So there's so much there that I love already. I don't really need to know any more. I'm dying to get to it. So that will be coming up soon. And I just have a sense, based on reading Station 11, that Emily St. John Mandel's writing is so sort of warm and engaging, and also keeps you turning the page, that this will be one of those books that, you can enjoy reading even in unsettling times. So that is The Glass Hotel. Really looking forward to that one, so no pressure. But the next one is very different. It's Bubba Dunya's, or I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but it's Bubba Dunya's Last Love by Alina Bronsky, translated by Tim Mohr. And this, I might have talked about this, I think, on this channel before, but it is really, really good. It's a small sort of gem. It's a very short novel set in Russia, and it's about a woman called Bubba Dunya who moves back to her hometown, which is based on the town of Chernobyl. And so it's a radioactive town, and she decides to go back. They're all sort of, obviously, they've all been evacuated, but she decides to go back. That's her home. That's her house. She really says, where else am I supposed to live? And there are about 12 of them in total who do go back and live there. So there's this quite strange community, and you follow them in sort of their daily struggles because they're really having to survive on what they're growing or eating and what they're able to get when they do go to the shops, which is in the next town. And of course, they're viewed as radioactive. And so they're sort of isolated and not welcomed by outsiders because of that, where they're living. So it's quite apt for these times in the sense of being literally a whole town under quarantine and that isolation and loneliness. But it is also very funny. She has a really dark sense of humour and it's quite bracing and dry, and I just loved it. The characters come to life and it's sort of unlike anything I've read, and I thought it was so engaging, and it did everything for me that I didn't get but I wanted to get from Drive Your Plough Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk, which is also an older woman in a remote community, and this just really propelled me along and I loved it. So that is Bubba Dunya's Last Love, and Alina Bronsky's well known for another book which is something about the Tatar cuisine, which is the hottest dishes of the Tatar cuisine. So I'm quite keen to read that one as well, but this one is excellent, so I can recommend that. And I think also being a short novel is good at the moment because sometimes you just don't have the concentration to read a full-length book. So that is a good one. And then we come to The Summer Book by Tove Jansson, and this is translated by Thomas Teal, and it has a foreword by Esther Freud. And I've just been, because I'm going to do a blog post on this, so I've just spent about 45 minutes trying to sum up why I love Tove Jansson's writing, why I love this book, and why it's a perfect sort of comfort read. And it was so hard to express what it is about it. It's set on an island in Finland, and it's about a grandmother and her granddaughter Sophia who comes to stay with her. And so there's not a huge plot, but it is the two of them exploring the island. There's a magic forest that their grandmother tends to, and that Sophia comes, and they pay great attention to the twigs and the moss and the wildlife in this special part of the forest. They go for swims and they have conversations. They fall asleep sometimes. It's really gorgeous. And I think some of the things that I love about Tove Jansson's writing, and I've loved the Moomins as a child, so I was so excited when I saw she'd written books for adults, is she's very unsentimental. So this is not sort of warm, fuzzy, gushy style at all. She's really dry, and it's quite bracing and confronting sometimes about aging. So there's a scene where Sophia says to her grandmother, "When will you die?" And her grandmother says, "Soon, but that's no concern of yours." And so it's very honest and unflinching, but there's also something really warm and comforting about her writing, and I really have trouble explaining it, but there's a little bit of philosophy thrown in. I think also what's really lovely is the landscape. So she has a real love of the landscape, and she evokes the island and also the sea beautifully, and I think that gives you a quietness and a calming sense, as if you are on holidays on an island where life slows down a bit and you can just pay attention to the natural world around you. And there's something about that gives you space to breathe and sort of slow down. And anyway, all in all, it's just a wonderful comfort read, and I can't recommend it highly enough. So if you haven't yet discovered Tove Jansson's work or her work for adults, this will be such a joy. That's The Summer Book, and I recommend any of her books, but this one really stood out for me for this sort of category of comfort reading. And then we come to another thing that you might want to do is get swept up in a longer novel, and just be completely swept away in a really immersive, longer read. So then we have Tyll by Daniel Kehlmann, translated from the German by I want to say Ross Benjamin. Let's check. Yes, Ross Benjamin. So this one I read recently. I loved Daniel Kehlmann's one of his earlier novels, Measuring the World, and I was so excited to find this was in the bookshop. I didn't even know it was coming out, so I had to buy it immediately. And it's set in the 30 Years' War, which I didn't know much about, in Germany, in the forests, and the main character is Tyll, who's a prankster from German folklore, and he plays practical jokes and has his own show and is quite demonic and naughty, but it also takes you back to his childhood and how he has survived and made this life for himself. But then it introduces figures from history and goes behind the scenes into their lives. And Daniel Kehlmann it's got such an originality to it. It's so vividly portrayed. And again, he has this sort of dry humor that I really love. And I was completely swept away with this, loved going back to it. It was a complete escape from, day-to-day reality, because you're in a totally different place, setting, time period. Everything is really fabulous. And yeah, I thoroughly recommend that. If you're wanting a longer book, and it's not that long, it's about 400 and something. No, it's sort of 300, under 400 pages, so it's not actually that long, but it is a beautiful, rich story to immerse yourself in. So I have talked about this already, I think, on this channel, so I won't go on and on again about it, but yeah, I really loved it. So that's Teal by Daniel Kehlmann. Then a gorgeous novel, There Was Still Love by Favel Parrett. And Favel Parrett is an Australian author, so this is good for Aussie April as well. And this is shortlisted for the Stella Prize, which is being announced, I think, tomorrow night. So fingers crossed. I have a feeling that The Yield will win, but I really, really loved this. And again, it was just a beautiful, comforting read. It gives you all the feels. It keeps you turning the page. It's about two children and their grandmothers are sisters, and one lives in Prague and one lives in Melbourne. So it's really the effect of the Iron Curtain and part of the family leaving Prague and going to settle in Melbourne to sort of looking for a better life. And so you have the contrasting stories and the childhoods of these grandchildren, and then their relationship with their grandparents, which is beautiful. And I just really adored it. It's just really beautifully written, and she does it really lightly. She doesn't try to overwrite it. She just lets the story shine through, which I love. So it's very clean writing and very compassionate, and her characters are just beautifully sort of brought to life. And I just really thoroughly enjoyed this. So again, I think it's that sort of novel that you don't have to concentrate too hard, because she lets the story take you through and keep you turning the pages, and you can again get swept away and go into a different place. And the characters are lovely they're sort of characters that you want to be in their company, so you can just enjoy it. So that is There Was Still Love by Favel Parrett. Then on to the non-fiction. So to start with, it has to be Stefan Zweig. There are so many of his that I would recommend, including all of his fiction. And they're again really short novels or short stories, so they're very easy to tackle if you don't have much concentration. But this is his non-fiction Shooting Stars 10 Historical Miniatures by Stefan Zweig, and translated by Anthea Bell, who's excellent. So this is, and I could have chosen other of his other non-fiction that I love is the world, what's it called? Hang on a second. Is The World of Yesterday, which is really apt as well. But this is 10 historical miniatures. So he takes 10 moments from history, and I won't be able to remember what they are because I read it a long time ago, but he makes it's just his style is so engaging because he tells it like a story. So it's like a narrative, and it's like you're reading about a character and instead of having a history lesson, but it's just so intelligent, so you're learning as you go. And what I think is really good for these times about going back into history with someone as warm and with such delightful writing as Stefan Zweig is that it gives you that perspective that this is a moment in history. In the scheme of things, lots of other major events have happened, and so you can sort of escape to other times and other places and learn as you go, but also just be with these characters that he brings to life. So anything by Stefan Zweig, this is, and again, because it's 10 moments, you can dip in and dip out of it. So they're all quite self-contained. I think one of them is about Lenin going on the train from Switzerland to Russia or from somewhere to Switzerland. They smuggled him on the train. There's another one about the discovery of the Pacific in 1513. So it really ranges across time. And this was also, the structure for this was the inspiration for Simon Winchester's book Pacific, which gives 10 moments in the history of the Pacific Ocean or countries around the Pacific Ocean from 1950. And that's another one. If you enjoy this, or if you like Simon Winchester's writing, which I do, Pacific is fantastic as well. And again, really engrossing. And just because of the narrative style, it just keeps you turning the page. So that's Shooting Stars and anything by Stefan Zweig, one of my favourite authors. And then one of Amanda's recommendations, which I'm adopting as well, which is The Happiness Project by Gretchen Rubin. And Gretchen Rubin has other books. I think this might have been the first of hers on this theme. And she previously, I think, was a financial journalist. So she's quite rigorous with her research and thought processes, which I like. And this is a project where she set about thinking, well, how, we all want to be happier or live these sort of happier lives, but how do we actually do it? What really works if you want to do that? And what is it that makes us happy? And she sets aside, I think she does month by month. This is, again, it's a while since I read it, but I really loved it. She sets aside for each month a different area to focus on, and she then goes and researches it quite extensively and rigorously. And so each month she tries something different, and it's so good because there are practical ideas that you can adopt. I've forgotten what they are, but one of them is boost energy, and so she finds out ways to do that. She refers to Aristotle for one of them. She writes a novel. I think in November she does that novel writing NaNoWriMo challenge where you give yourself 30 days to write a novel, because that's something she's always wanted to do. So it's things like ticking things off your list that have either bothered you or have been dreams that you've never really attended to, but also much more practical things you can do at home to keep yourself happier with your family and things like that. And I think, as Amanda said, this is a good time, since we are spending more time at home, to sort of be more inward looking and reflect on what it is that makes us happy and get to work on it. And this is a great sort of prompt for some of those ideas. So The Happiness Project, and Gretchen Rubin has a podcast, I think, called The Happiness Project, which is good as well if you are, wanting to keep reading and keep listening on that theme. And then this is the last of the non-fiction that I have with me. But it is a big one. The Andy Warhol Diaries, edited by Pat Hackett. And this is about 900 pages, but it's literally his diaries. And I think the story was that he had a tax issue with claiming expenses. I could be wrong about this, but I think he was claiming expenses for his work, which involved going to lots of parties and events and taking taxis and things like that. And so he had to record all those expenses, and he had this practice of calling up his secretary at 9 o'clock every morning and recounting what he did the day before and the cost of, I took the taxi and it was $3.50 or something like that, so that he'd have a paper trail. I think that's why it started, but it ended up being, a real account of his life. And so every day you'd have a diary entry, and Pat Hackett has done an amazing job editing that, because what we have here is from 1970, 76 or thereabouts to 1987, and just before he died. And so you actually have it edited to the most interesting parts of that. So it is really, really amazing. I can't describe how good this is. It's really, because I didn't expect it to be that sort of compelling, I think. But I thought I would just dip in and out a bit, and I'd pick it up. I think I was on a beach holiday, and so I'd pick it up and read a random page. And then I was so captivated that I ended up reading it from beginning to end. And there are a lot of things that are interesting. One is that obviously he's seeing anyone who's anyone in New York at that time. So there's lots of name dropping and behind the scenes of the celebrities of the time. So he goes to dinner at Diane von Furstenberg's house and says, oh, she served the same thing. She always serves the same thing. And then he catches up with Calvin Klein, or he befriends Jean-Paul Basquiat and mentors him, and goes to visit Truman Capote. And so you get all of that. But so of course that's fascinating, but also Andy Warhol himself, he's like a character, and you can read it almost like a novel where you're following this character on a sort of a journey to see how that will develop. So if he has a relationship, is it going to continue? Will it end? What happens when they break up? And you're sort of following all of these things. He has a phobia about hospitals, which is a huge issue. And then there's a little bit of an afterword I think it's by Pat Hackett at the end, just commenting on how it does end with his death. And I won't, spoil that, but it's actually very moving. And this book made me want to go out more, because when you get this sense of Andy Warhol's life and his outings and his sort of just interactions, like they're not always with close friends, but just random interactions with people and the things that he sees and observes, and you also get his ideas. And he's such a thinker, and he's got, he had such a business brain, that's really interesting. But it made me think, life doesn't happen. As much as I love staying at home, and this is a funny time to be saying this because we are really at home around the clock, but life, happens with other people and doing sort of when you're out, life doesn't happen on the couch watching TV, if you know what I mean, as much as we love doing that. So this actually made me think I've got to get out more and, be amongst it a bit more, which has been, I think that's a positive effect that it's had. So in a way, to read it now is a good escape into someone who's going out constantly when we can't, but you can do it vicariously through Andy Warhol, and why not do it with him and with all the celebrities? So I can't explain why it's so compelling, but it really was for me. So let me know if you've read it, and if not, this is something you can really get stuck into in isolation. Now, the books that I haven't included, one is, I do have one here, but always a good comfort read is P.G. Wodehouse for me. Very funny, very light, but genius. I think he was so clever. And again, it's a total escape into a world that there are really no concerns at all, and love it. This is something fresh, but all of his Jeeves and Wooster books I highly recommend. And the other one, which I think I'll do a separate video or a separate blog post, is crime. So I think when you can't concentrate for a long stretch of time, you need a real page turner. Crime is a real escape for me, and I couldn't narrow that down to just one or two. I just kept thinking of new ones, and so I think I'll have about 10 crime books that we can talk about. But let me know. That's 8 or 9 for now, and I think I'll have 10 that I'll put up on the blog. So let me know what you've been reading. Do you have sort of isolation reads that are your go-to or comfort reads at the moment? And I will see you soon. Bye for now.